Tonight, I'm going to show you why a $20,000 Iranian drone didn't challenge America's most powerful warship. It rewrote the rules of the game around it, because the real contest wasn't drone versus carrier. It was cost versus cost. And in that contest, the cheap side is learning how to win. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see the same hidden pattern repeating across 3 empires, 3 centuries, and 3 different kinds of invincibility that all collapse the exact same way. And once you recognize the pattern, you'll realize this drone story isn't a headline, it's a receipt. Here's the first truth most people never say out loud. Modern power is financed, not just politically, not just technologically, financed. And the moment power becomes a financed product, something sustained by expanding obligations, the math starts setting traps. One contemporary number frames the entire battlefield we're living in. Global debt is now counted in the hundreds of trillions of dollars. Depending on how you measure it, you'll see totals around a $250 trillion, or well above $300 trillion in recent tallies. That isn't trivia. That's the operating system. Because when debt becomes the fuel, the machine must keep expanding to keep itself stable. More commitments, more platforms, more complexity, more coverage, more everything. And in that environment, a $20,000 drone isn't just a flying object. It's a scalpel aimed at the cost structure of empire. Now, let me make a claim that sounds extreme until you follow the steps. If you build security on priceless, high-tech platforms, and you fund that dominance through growing obligations, your opponents don't need to beat you in a fair fight. They only need to force you to defend your priceless assets over and over at a price you can't scale. Eventually, your cost per defense rises faster than your capacity to sustain it. At that point, the outcome isn't political, it's mathematical. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a mechanism, a clean, chronological pattern that repeats across history like a machine. Then I'll prove it with 3 case studies. Then I'll apply it to the present, step by step, like a forensic audit. And after each step, I'm going to say what the math says. Check, verified, undeniable. Here's the pattern. 4 stages. First, the foundation. A dominant system forms and becomes the standard. It works, so everyone builds around it. Trade, security, legitimacy, stacked. Second, overextension. The system expands commitments faster than it expands resilience. Redundancy gets replaced with efficiency. Simplicity gets replaced with complexity. And crucially, it begins funding the present by mortgaging the future through debt, promises, and obligations that compound. Third, loss of control. Challengers don't attack the system's strengths head-on. They attack its assumptions and its cost curve. They force expensive responses to cheap provocations. The system still looks powerful, but control starts leaking through the seams. Fourth, strategic inversion. The world flips. The dominant system doesn't fail because it becomes weak in absolute terms. It fails because it becomes inefficient relative to the threats it faces. Its tools are too rare, too costly, too slow, too precious to risk. It loses initiative, and once initiative is gone, it's a countdown. That's the machine. Now let's prove it. Case 1, Rome. Money, borders, and the economics of too much empire. Rome becomes the ultimate platform. Roads, law, legions, standardized trade. For a long time, Rome's security creates prosperity, and prosperity funds security. That's the foundation. Then the empire expands, the frontier stretches, the army grows, administration grows, promises grow, and then the hard reality hits. Maintaining legions across thousands of miles isn't just expensive, it's structurally expensive. The bigger the perimeter, the more you must defend, the more unpredictable your defense becomes. That's overextension. So Rome does what overextended systems do. It starts playing with the currency, debasement, reducing precious metal content over time, not ideology, survival. You can only tax so hard. You can only conquer so fast. When obligations outrun revenue, money becomes policy. That's the mortgage of the future. Then comes loss of control. Once currency trust weakens, everything else follows in slow motion. Soldier loyalty becomes more transactional. Politics becomes more unstable. The empire spends more energy putting out internal fires while still trying to hold the borders. And here's the key part. Challengers don't need to match Rome's logistics. They don't need Rome's roads or bureaucracy. They just need to exploit the seams, raid, withdraw, force responses, repeat. Decentralized threats make centralized defense bleed. Rome doesn't fall in one day. It inverts. It starts outsourcing defense, relying on federated groups, losing monopoly on violence. And when you lose monopoly on violence, you're no longer an empire. You're a reputation running on inertia. Foundation, overextension, loss of control, strategic inversion, same machine. Case 2, France and the Maginot Line, the illusion of perfect defense. After World War I, France has a trauma-driven political demand. Never again. That's the foundation. Security built on memory and necessity. Then overextension appears in a different form. France converts security into fixed capital. The Maginot Line isn't just defense, it's a monument. Concrete, fortifications, sunk cost. It signals seriousness. It reassures the public. It turns fear into architecture. But here's the trap. When your defense becomes a monument, it becomes less adaptable. You're paying premium prices to lock down one version of the future. Now, loss of control. Germany doesn't beat the wall. It sidesteps it, exploiting assumptions, speed, and maneuver. The biggest defensive investment becomes strategically irrelevant, not because it was weak, but because it was rigid. Then strategic inversion. France is forced into a collapse of initiative. The defense that was supposed to guarantee control becomes a trap because it cannot shift at the speed of the new threat. Foundation, overextension, loss of control, inversion. Same machine. Case 3. The United States, Bretton Woods, and the moment money becomes escape. After World War II, America sits at the center of the global system. Bretton Woods, the dollar anchored, industry dominant, security architecture built globally. That's the foundation. Then overextension, compounding obligations, domestic programs, global bases, Cold War commitments, Vietnam, political pressure. The system is asked to do everything at once, fight wars, fund prosperity, stabilize allies, and maintain a currency standard. And then the constraint hits, the costs outrun the reserves. So in 1971, the US breaks the gold link, the Nixon shock. The dollar stops being redeemable for gold at a fixed rate. That wasn't just a policy shift, it was a structural admission. When obligations exceed backing, the system changes the definition of money. That's the mortgage of the future, made official. Then loss of control. The 1970s deliver stagflation and energy shocks. Economic volatility becomes a feature, not a bug. And strategically, the logic of conflict shifts toward cost imposition. You start seeing the template. Don't match the empire's firepower. Make it wasted. Cheap tactics force expensive responses. And then strategic inversion. The expensive force becomes constrained by its own cost, politics, and tolerance. The system can still be powerful and still be strategically exhausted. Same machine. Now, here's the part you came for. We apply the same mechanism to the drone and the carrier, step by step. And I want you to listen like an accountant listening to a fraud case. No emotion, just structure. Stage 1, foundation in the present. America's carrier strike groups became the ultimate symbol of power projection. A floating city with an air force on top. The ability to move force anywhere, independent of local basing rights. For decades, it worked. Presence deterred. Capability reassured allies. The assumption was simple. No one sane will seriously contest this at sea. Check. Stage 2, overextension in the present. Now look at what the carrier actually is. Not a ship, but a node in a giant system. Satellites, logistics, maintenance cycles, specialized parts, rare munitions, elite pilots, layered defenses, alliance signaling, constant readiness. And because the asset is priceless, it must be protected at all costs. That at all costs phrase is where the trap begins. Because if the platform is sacred, every potential threat, even small, ambiguous, cheap threats, demands a response that is safe, credible, and fast. And safe, credible, fast responses are expensive by design, not because anyone is dumb, because the downside risk of being wrong is catastrophic. Verified. Stage 3, loss of control in the present. Enter the drone. Not a wonder weapon, not an unstoppable machine, a cheap, expendable, mass-producible threat that sits in the perfect modern warfare sweet spot. Low cost, ambiguous intent, hard to ignore, and capable of forcing high-end systems to reveal behavior. And here's what was reported. An Iranian drone approached a U.S. aircraft carrier operating in the region. The approach was described as aggressive and unclear in intent. And the response involved a high-end intercept. Now pause. Because this is the revelation in one sentence. A disposable object forced one of the most expensive military systems on Earth to spend readiness and attention on its terms. Even if you shoot it down, the drone already succeeded in the strategic sense because it forced the carrier to pay. Undeniable. Now we go one layer deeper because this is where retention usually dies, when creators stay abstract. So I'm going to make it concrete. A modern carrier isn't defeated when it's hit. It's defeated when it is forced to operate like a hunted animal instead of a sovereign predator. That means higher alert states. That means altered flight operations. That means changed routes. That means more patrols. That means more maintenance. That means more fatigue. That means more decision bandwidth burned on cheap stimuli. And the attacker doesn't need to win today. They need to run a pressure system. A constant squeeze. Because the attacker's question is not, can I destroy the carrier? The attacker's question is, how many times can I make you do this? How many times can you scramble? How many times can you intercept? How many times can you keep discipline perfect? No mistakes, no accidents, no misreads, while your people get tired and your budgets stretch. Because the cheap side doesn't need you to fail once in 100. They need you to fail once in 1,000. And the more complex your system, the more chances they get. Check. Stage 4, strategic inversion in the present. This is where the word outsmarted becomes precise. The drone didn't outsmart radar. It outsmarted the economic model of security. It exploited sacredness, because sacred assets demand expensive reactions. And expensive reactions, repeated, create strategic paralysis. Here's the cold logic chain. Watch how it locks shut. 1, cheap drones can be produced in large numbers. 2, they can be launched irregularly with ambiguous intent. 3, the defender must respond because the downside risk of not responding is catastrophic. 4, every response consumes scarce resources. Sorties, maintenance, munitions, crew endurance, command attention, and political bandwidth. 5, repeated pressure forces the defender into an impossible choice. Spend more or accept more risk. And a system built on the promise of certainty can't psychologically tolerate more risk, so it spends more. Until it can't. Verified. And now zoom out, because the drone is just the clearest metaphor of a bigger era. We built a world of exquisite systems. Financial markets optimized for leverage, or supply chains optimized for efficiency, institutions optimized for scale, militaries optimized for high-end perfection. Exquisite systems are powerful, but they are not resilient. They don't fail because they're weak. They fail because they are brittle, because small shocks create oversized reactions. That is the signature of a system entering inversion. Small things start controlling big things. A cheap drone controlling a priceless carrier's behavior is not a military novelty. It is a structural preview. Undeniable. Now let's kill 3 comforting myths, because these myths are how audiences fall asleep right before the important part. Myth 1, American exceptionalism. The idea that the U.S. is exempt from the laws of history. History doesn't care. Systems that overextend, finance dominance through compounding obligations, and build brittle complexity get exploited by cost imposition strategies. That's not political, that's structural. Myth 2, we're richer now, we can afford it. Debt is not wealth. Debt is a claim on future capacity. When the future is already pledged, your margin gets thin. Thin margins turn small shocks into real crises. Myth 3, technology will save us. Technology changes tactics, but it does not cancel math. If your defenses cost orders of magnitude more than the threats they must defeat, you are not in a technology contest. You are in a production contest. And production contests favor whoever can scale cheaply. Check. Now the question becomes personal because you're not just watching geopolitics. You're watching how systems behave. So here's your actionable takeaway, and it's practical because it's a way to read the world. Stop tracking events. Start tracking cost curves. When you see a dominant player, nation, company, market, building more complex, more expensive tools to maintain control, ask one question. Where is the cost curve vulnerability? Where can a smaller actor impose disproportionate cost? Because that's where the next impossible event will come from. 3 moves you can make as a viewer of this era. First, stop judging outcomes by whether the cheap threat was destroyed. Start judging outcomes by what it forced the system to spend: money, attention, readiness, legitimacy. That tells you who is winning strategically. Second, watch for repetition. 1 incident is news. 10 incidents is a trend. 100 incidents is doctrine. 1,000 incidents is a new normal that quietly breaks the defender's tempo. Third, learn to spot brittleness. When the response to a small stimulus becomes huge, it means the system's margin is thin. Thin margins are where collapses begin. Undeniable. Now the final warning, and I'm going to say it in plain language. The drone story isn't about whether America can win a war. It's about whether America, or any high-cost power, can afford the tempo of modern conflict while carrying the obligations of modern finance. Because the next stage of the pattern always looks like this: more probes, more ambiguity, more forced reactions, more spending to preserve the appearance of control, more political strain, more hesitation, and then, eventually, one decision not to respond fast enough, one overload, one miscalculation, one moment where the system reveals it can't cover every angle anymore. That's when inversion becomes visible to everyone. The drone was not the story. The drone was the receipt, and the bill doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives as a new normal you can't afford to sustain. So here's what I want you to do. If you want to understand what comes next, you need to understand how the machine was built, how power became expensive, how defense became a financial instrument, and how cheap threats became the master key that unlocks strategic inversion. subscribe now, because in the next video, we're going to map the next stage. How swarms, saturation, and cost imposition spread beyond the battlefield into markets, shipping lanes, and the daily economics of your life. And the only people who won't be surprised are the ones who recognize the pattern before it becomes the headline. The receipt is already printed. Now we're just waiting to see who pretends not to read it.